organizations that are in the Department of Defense's supply chain, most are aware that CMMC requirements are coming and in some cases already here. So this begs the question, how do you go about getting compliant? That's the main topic of focus today as I speak with Daniel Akridge, the Director of Engagement from Summit 7, a managed service provider serving the defense industrial base. Daniel is also the host of his own show, That CMMC Show, which you can check out on Summit 7's YouTube channel. And Daniel was gracious enough to have me on as the first guest of that show. So I'm honored to be able to return the favor and have him on as our first episode. In it, we discuss the overall strategy of compliance to CMMC Level 2 by dissecting the difference between technical and non-technical requirements, how Microsoft solutions can help with technical requirements, and the role of outside experts to assist you through this process. So without further ado, please enjoy this conversation with Daniel Akridge on the first episode of Mostly Compliant. Okay, Daniel Akridge, thank you so much for joining us on Mostly Compliant podcast here. Very excited to dive into some topics with you. As I talked about in the intro, you were gracious enough to have me on for the first episode of your show, That CMMC Show. So I'm very happy to return the favor. So welcome. I'm excited to dive into some topics around CMMC with you.
I'm excited as well, Matt. Excited to get in there and figure out what are the confusing things? How do we explain them simply? How do we get people on the same page? Because there is just so much floating out there in the ecosystem that people just kind of latch on to different pieces, right? Is it October 1st for certification? Is it, can I self-attest? Do I have to go to a GovCloud? Can I get compliant on-prem? All the questions. So excited to be here, excited to walk through them all with you today.
Perfect. Well, you hit on a lot of the ones that I want to touch on here today. To your point, a lot of the same questions coming up over and over again. I would like to start maybe a little bit high level. So especially for anybody that is relatively new to this and just thinking about how to tackle something like CMMC compliance, there's 110 requirements, obviously. So when we're looking at those 110 requirements from NIST 800-171 Rev 2, you can generally think of them into two buckets as technical controls and non-technical controls. And, from Summit 7 and being an MSP, you guys are a Microsoft reseller. You understand their solution really well. I'd love to dive into the technical side a little bit, but could you first maybe give an overview? Okay, if I'm thinking technical versus non-technical requirements, what are maybe, how would you describe maybe the difference and maybe an example or two of each of those?
That's a good question. So I get this actually a fair amount, and I go back to the triangle: confidentiality, integrity, availability. So if you're in security, the Illuminati symbol of the security triangle. If you look at NIST 800-171, it's all about the confidentiality piece of it, right? So that's what the DoD is really sensitive about. They want you to protect the secrets, if you will, the controlled unclassified information. So when we're talking physical controls versus technical controls or non-technical versus technical controls, I want to kind of move back into the conversation around confidentiality. And there's two ways to do that. There's encryption, which is a technical means to do it, which is different ways to apply that. It all has to be FIPS validated, which we'll go into more detail later. And that's a technical control, right? Encrypting my laptop, encrypting my phone, cloud providers that are encrypted in transit for their information and data flow. And then there's the physical compensating controls, which is having your CUI stored in a lockbox, cover sheets, access control, right? From a physical access perspective of who can access it, right? Are you printing things, right? All of those pieces that you can't apply a digital technology to, if you will, from an encryption standpoint, you have to have physical components of it. And that's where the physical controls come in. If I have a piece of paper, I have to protect the confidentiality of that piece of paper. I have to be able to log who's seeing it, log who has access to it, keep it securely stored, all of those different things from a CUI perspective. And then you have to go even a level above if it ends up being export control data, and you have to go as far as deeming like personship, like US personship, or potentially citizenship, depending on the type of export control it is. So the best way to think about it is like, okay, am I trying to solve the technical problem here or the non-technical? Meaning, do I have the technology that I can apply encryption to and check the box there? Or do I need to protect the physical items associated with a, printed or some sort of physical media that has CUI on it?
Fantastic. As a C3PAO, I get a lot of clients that are in various stages of readiness and understanding. So I get a lot of questions around this. So that's why I'm excited to dive into maybe that technical side a little bit more. That's what I think most people think of when they think of compliance. It's maybe the bigger beast to tackle. So when you look at the technical controls that organizations need to get compliant towards, you can have cloud service providers with tools and stacks like your Microsofts of the world that can be very helpful and provide all sorts of tools to help around this. Could you give us an overview? You guys know Microsoft really well, of their solutions that can help with the technical controls, especially as it pertains to CMMC compliance?
Absolutely. So first off, whenever you're looking at a provider that's going to process, store, transmit CUI, got to be FedRAMP. So the question I answer all the time before I get into any other details is the Microsoft Commercial Cloud FedRAMP? And the answer is no. They dropped their FedRAMP moderate equivalency in October of last year. So it means you have to go to one of their gov clouds, GCC or GCC High. Now, luckily, there's feature parity largely between the gov clouds and the commercial cloud. Now, there are some nuances, but overall, for the sake of this conversation, they're going to be like for like in this. So a couple of really key tools. Microsoft has something called the Defender Stack, or the Microsoft Defender. You've probably heard of it. They have a few different versions of that. They have Defender for Endpoint Plan 2, which is your endpoint detection and response. They have Defender for Office 365 or Defender for M365. That's the spam filter. That's scanning external sources internal. They have Defender for Cloud Apps. So it's actually able to do logging and monitoring of not only Microsoft clouds, but also third-party clouds. So you can ingest those logs, if you will, into the system and even apply purview labels to box gov type stuff, right? Versus M365. So you can expand that search pretty significantly. So those are just like a few of the general tools that Microsoft has on the Defender stack. Now there's other things, right? So we talked about authorization. One of the key pieces of NIST, of CMMC, is we need to validate who, what, where is kind of accessing the system, right? In the sense of, if you look at the 3.1.1 control, we're looking at authorizing users. So we use Intra ID for that. We're looking at identifying devices and authorizing devices. We use Intune for that, for both mobile and for desktops, laptops, things of that nature. And then we overlay something called conditional access policies, which is also part of Intra ID. So that allows the enforcement of only compliant and managed devices and users to be able to access the tenant. So we limit it out of the box, and this is a Summit 7 configuration, to only allow access from within inside the United States for a user, unless they're in an approved foreign travel policy exemption group, right? So when you start looking at some of this stuff, you can have worldwide users using the Microsoft Gov Cloud, but again, it all comes back to access and control when it comes to things like that. Other great tool sets, Microsoft has something called Purview. So that allows you to do data protection, encryption, marking, and labeling, DLP. So we can kind of understand a CUI being exfiltrated through any certain means in the cloud or even at the endpoint level. That's just another really great tool that they have as part of their stack. We use Microsoft Sentinel, which runs inside of Azure as the SIEM or the SIM, depending on which side of, whether you're northern pronunciation or southern pronunciation. We use that as our centralized log management tool as well, to not only ingest Microsoft services, but on-prem services, right? Third-party services through syslogs or native connectors. And so when you start looking at the whole platform, this is why I love the Microsoft solution so much. It is as much of a one-stop shop as you can. Is it expensive? Absolutely. GCC High is usually about 30 to 40% more than an E3 in commercial. And so when you're looking at the differences there, it is more expensive. But if you look at having to bolt on all these third-party security tools, a separate SIEM provider, separate DLP, separate spam filter, separate endpoint detection, you well exceeded the cost of a Microsoft license. And so that's why I really like the product, because it just comes fully loaded with so many things. They still have to be configured. That's another kind of misconception. GCC High, when you buy it, does not come pre-configured for CMMC. They are meeting the data center requirements. So you do have to go in there and either hire somebody like Summit 7 to come in and configure it, or configure it yourself and then map all that to the controls of NIST 800-171 Rev 2.
That's perfect. Quick side note, I'm a sim guy myself in terms of
You're a sim, I'm
pronunciation.
a sim. It's okay.
It's okay. We can still get along. I'm glad you touched on that. I was going to say, you mentioned this C word, configuration.
Yes.
Can you dive into that a little bit more? Because even as a C3PO, we
Mhm.
see that, right? So you're telling me if I decide, hey, I want to go into GCC high, Daniel mentioned it's going to be more expensive, but it comes with all of these tools that help that I would have had to go get, external tools or help with regardless that may have added up to that and then some. So I've
Yeah.
decided to go into that. You're saying I can't just purchase that and say we're good. Can you walk through like what does configuration look like? What else is needed there?
Yeah. So what's interesting is like when you get a tenant. So if you were to go get a trial of a Microsoft commercial tenant today, which you can do, it comes to you completely unconfigured. You don't have the domain registered. It doesn't have any out of the box security policies like enforced, day one. There's so much stuff that you have to go in there and turn the knob. So a really good example is something called Intune. So Intune is the MDM kind of engine, if you will, mobile device management that extends to iOS, Android, Windows, and Mac. So from there, I can do security baselines of like my Windows computer. So instead of group policy, I can use Intune to do that. And so Microsoft doesn't know what controls you're trying to meet. And not only that, because you can prescribe the parameters, so like a screen timeout, right? The DoD through CMMC doesn't mandate you must have a 5-minute screen timeout. You get to set that. Well, Microsoft's not going to assume that they know better than you. They're going to assume that your business will want to set those variables, those parameters. So none of those things are configured out of the box. So you have to go in there and build the policies, build the profiles of all these Intune policies, and then roll them out to all of your devices so that they have a good security baseline for configuration. Not only that, to your point, Matt, we see a lot of people do a configuration, but then forsake change management of that configuration. So by the time they get to prep for their assessment, they realize they have huge configuration drift from what they originally deployed. Well, that's problematic because when you show an assessor, oh yeah, here's a screenshot that I took, 2 months ago. Oh, but then they ask for a real-time proof that it actually exists and it was different than the screenshot. And maybe it's not compliant now with the way that somebody changed it. That's all very problematic.
Yeah. What's generally, what do you see as the level of effort, time, resources, et cetera, for people to go through the configuration side? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So it kind of depends on experience. It kind of kind of maps to a few different variables there. Like, are you familiar with Microsoft? Are you familiar with the Gov Cloud? Because there are kind of nuances to that.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with compliance frameworks and how to do mapping? We see somewhere between 1,200 to 2,000 configurations that like unique configurations that have to be made in the Microsoft stack.
Wow.
When we're actually configuring it to meet CMMC. And those are individual level settings, right? And so when you're looking at that, I mean, it could take your team 2, 3, 4, 5 months to just do the implementation of this environment, let alone all of the documenting and validating it's actually compliant. I mean, you're looking at a technical resource, a minimum one, if not multiple. You're looking at a compliance manager of some sort of like quality if you're in the ISO world to actually do the documentation and validation. I mean, you're looking at basically a tiger team that would have to attack this thing for multiple months to get it to where it needs to be.
Wow. I think that's often overlooked. Do you have any thoughts on, okay, let's say I still want to consider non-Microsoft solutions, non-GCC high. So if you're putting yourself in the head of somebody else who goes, okay, but if I don't want to put that cost on and I'm going to maybe try to get compliant through other means, what does that actually end up looking like? To your point, once you bolt on the cost and the level of effort of all these additional tools, do you have any thoughts on what that actually looks like? And then especially as it pertains to this configuration discussion, because I would imagine, I'm not trying to lead the witness too much here, but I would imagine having Microsoft and all of your configuration within that, there might be something to that streamlined approach versus configuring and managing all of these different tools together.
Yep. So like Google, right? Now on the space, right? Trying to get into the more of the gov contracting space. So like, that's a really good example. I personally use Gmail accounts, right? Like I've used Google for a very long time. However, on the business side of the approach, when you look at all the add-ins it takes to fully implement CMMC controls from device management to endpoint protection to all of those different things that aren't included with the Google Workspace licensing, you just end up kind of again in this place where it's like, oh, I have to go manage another portal. I have to validate the configurations right in another portal. I have to, pay for another service, another tool, right? And so when you start again adding that up, it becomes a little complex. The two things that we're seeing a lot of right now is, if people don't do Microsoft, they're trying it with Google, and they're trying it with these new zero trust browsers you've probably heard of. And so both Google and zero trust browsers is kind of interesting. So Google, a lot of people are trying to do the Chromebook route, right? Where I get a Chromebook, it's managed by the Google Workspace, and I have everything contained right there. And then on the zero trust browser, I can only access CUI within this protected browser, and it cannot process, store, or transmit unencrypted CUI on my local system. It's kind of a very interesting technology. Yeah. But it all comes back to data flow. And so we see people wanting a really cheap and a really fast solution, which guess what? I completely understand. I'm assuming at some point on the podcast we'll talk about timeline because it's the hottest thing to talk about these days. But with CMMC rapidly approaching, you just realize like, oh my gosh, I have to have a solution yesterday. I can't wait in a line, right? I like to say you can be early for CMMC, you can be late, but you can't be on time. And so many people are trying to be on time right now. But when you look at these two platforms, Google Workspace, and you look at managed zero trust browsers, what happens if I have to take the data out of that environment, right? What happens if I need to put it on a USB drive? Like, can I apply encryption policies to that USB? What happens if I need to put it on the network and print over my network, right? Is Google gonna provide me the way to correlate all of my logs into a SIEM? They have something called Chronicle. Is that part of their FedRAMP stack? I honestly don't know the answer to that question. But when you start going through the actual data flow of like, yeah, if you can keep everything in a browser, good on you. We work with so many manufacturers that if they can't work with engineering tools with CUI, it's dead in the water to them. Useless. You just can't do the work at all, right? And so when you're looking at a solution, regardless of what it is, you have to make sure two things. It supports your data flow, period, that the data coming in all the way through you, sending the data back out, that whole process is mapped out, and that the tools you're buying can support that in a compliant way. And this is the one that's often overlooked. When you go and you get CMMC certified, it's for a very specific boundary that you've determined. If a year from now, I go and win a contract, and that contract requires more of my business than I had in scope for CMMC, guess what? I cannot put that, I'll call it CMMC CUI, in an environment outside of what's been certified. Yeah. That's problematic. It would require me to go get yet another certification within my 3-year window. So not only map your current data flow today, ideally you're looking to bring the systems and scope that are going to be able to support your contracts over your 3-year period of your certification. So you don't have to come off, $30, $40, $50, $60, $70, $80,000 again to pay for yet another assessment just because some assets were overlooked as part of the scope.
Yeah. I think we're seeing a lot of that as well, where an organization is kind of rushing to their end line, their end goal is certification, understandably, but maybe they're viewing it from such a myopic lens that they're saying, hey, let's just minimize the scope as much as possible. Put it only on browsers, on, Google devices, and like, hey, let's just get certified. And then they look at, okay, is this operational? And we're seeing, I think there's going to be a problem of organizations that rush to that, then having to rethink, okay, this wasn't operational to your point of actually fulfilling the contracts in the way that we need. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. Since you mentioned it, I was gonna wait a little bit later, but we can talk about the timeline stuff because I think this will lead into some of the other stuff that I want to discuss. So we're about midway through August right now. If we're pulling out our crystal balls, October, November-ish, 48 CFR rule might be finalized. What are you seeing right now? You've had a lot of experience talking to and working with a ton of organizations who have gotten ready for CMMC certification, i.e. getting compliant to the controls, working with Summit 7 as an MSP. What does that timeline generally look like? Or when clients ask you, because I know this is a little bit of a loaded question, what are some of the factors that you sort of caveat in terms of discussing how long does it take me to get ready?
That is a great question. So since 32 CFR happened, which was the CMMC program being finalized last December, we've seen a large uptick in people being really sensitive to the CMMC thing now. It's still not as many as you would think. You would have thought that would have been the ultimate wake-up call. I'm talking to people on a daily basis that still don't understand the ramifications of what CMMC actually is.
Yep.
But the 32 CFR woke up a bunch of the primes, and the primes with very deep pockets. And they're going out, and this is not just Summit 7, this is a lot of the consultants that I know, they're going up and buying the time and the expertise, projects and managed services from these companies to get them CMMC certified ahead of informing their supply chain. They are not, they're making sure they're okay before they notify their supply chain to see if they're okay, at least from my experience.
Yep.
And so right now you're seeing a lot of movement in the supply chain notification world. Like last 30 days, we've had a lot of primes coming out and saying, hey, get ready to be certified. Boeing has said it. Lockheed has said it. I mean, just those two alone. The Army Corps of Engineers went on SAM.gov and said it. Like, hey, when CMMC happens, get ready because it's going to be in solicitations. So a lot of people are trying to buy up all the competent resources to do it. So the first thing is you need to get in line somewhere. You wait until 48 CFR drops, which for those not understanding what that is, 48 CFR is the mechanism that gives the DoD the ability to put it into contracts. That's what starts the phased rollout of CMMC into solicitations and then make it a requirement of contract award. So if you wait until that's in your solicitation, and let's say your award cycle is 30 days on average is what GSA comes up with, I think it's 32 days. That takes a lot longer than a month to get compliant and get certified.
Yeah.
So what we see right now is with backlog, with time to implement, and honestly, the longest pole in the tent, meaning the creating and delivering all of the documentation and finding somebody in your organization that will represent a senior official to sign off on everything.
Yeah.
Like we're seeing that process, even for an enclave, takes somewhere between 4 to 6 months on the shortest runway. I mean, that is being aggressive. And that's, having somebody available 24/7, ready to sign, the policies, the procedures, and all of those things. So very kind of short-sighted. You're looking at about a 4 to 6 month. I mean, that's very aggressive. Once 48 CFR drops and everyone realizes the severity of, I might not have an actual business if I can't do this. I mean, that's how severe it will be for some small businesses. Then guess what? Like the line's going to be out the door. The line's going to be 12 months long, 18 months long. And then what are you going to do? Can you survive on no defense revenue for 6, 12, 18 months? And I can tell you right now, a lot of the companies that I talk to, even if it's only part of their revenue, it's usually a significant part. They want to keep it around, right? They don't want to have to do layoffs. They don't want to have to sell off that side of the business. And so right now is the time to position yourself, because 48 CFR happens around October of this year, which would start CMMC into solicitations. And then you add 6 months before you're even, ready to be assessed and certified. There's a gap already there, right? I mean, it's 2 months out from hitting that October date. So it's just very concerning that the industry hasn't fully woken up. But why these conversations are so important, people need to understand you can't just flip a switch. It takes multiple months to get compliant. I mean, on the low end, again, 6 months. I mean, we've seen implementations and honestly, CMMC cultural adoption take 12, 18, 24 months, which sounds crazy, but that's just, we've seen companies preparing for this since 2021, 2022, and they were early adopters. They got their certification, which we just wrapped our 40th of 40th client CMMC L2 cert, which is great to be able to say. We've not missed on one. We want to keep that record up as much as possible. So
that is awesome. I appreciate that walkthrough. I completely agree. If you're waiting for 48 CFR to drop, guess who else is waiting for 48 CFR?
Everybody.
To drop, right?
Everybody's waiting.
So to your point, it's like, now is your opportunity. Now is your window to not be part of that mad dash that gets caught up in backlogs ballooning on both ends, on the implementation and the C3PAO end. Okay, that was a really good overview on the timelines. As we head towards the end of this conversation, I would like to kind of circle back to a few things. So briefly mentioned Summit 7, MSP, this term. We talked about Microsoft, how you guys understand that, the effort with configuration. Talk me through, for anybody that's not aware or they're only vaguely aware, how would you define MSP, MSSP, And then what is it that you really help solve for, especially as it pertains to some of the topics that we covered here today?
Absolutely. So when we're looking at kind of the definition, you're going to hear a lot of different things. CMMC calls them external service providers. Now, in our world, we just call that a managed service provider, right? Somebody providing IT, security, or managed compliance services to your organization. It's an external party that is supporting you in your journey of CMMC. And so when we look at this can range anything from your IT support, patch management, onboarding users, supporting your infrastructure, help desk services, security services for SOC stuff, all the way up through managing your compliance journey, right? Writing SSPs, POAMs, policies, procedures, getting through the assessment with you. So when we look at kind of the whole array of different services, IT, security, and compliance, these entities, I'll call them, or these external service providers, these MSPs, MSSPs, MGRCs, they have to also make sure that they're compliant. Now, hear me when I say this. CMMC was very clear that an MSP or an ESP does not have to be CMMC L2 certified, and they don't. They do not have to be, but they do have to have something called a customer responsibility matrix, and they have to show how they're supporting you. And not only that, if they're using cloud tools that process, store, transmit CUI, they also have to be FedRAMP. So they have to abide by the same rules as if they were just an extension of your environment, right? And they're part of your actual assessment. So I will say this, over the past few months, I have actually had a lot of companies come back to me and say, Daniel, we went with an MSP a year ago or 2 years ago. They said they were going to get us CMMC ready. We were stoked about it. We signed the contract. We realized later on that our contract didn't call out CMMC specifically, that it was a handshake deal, and that they're actually abandoning us when we told them that we were ready to schedule our assessment.
Wow.
Because they didn't have a customer responsibility matrix. They didn't have the compliant tools that they needed to do to manage the environment. Because you have to realize, like MSPs, there are very few defense industrial base focused MSPs out there in the world.
Yeah.
Like very, very, very few. Most of them support car dealerships and law firms and doctors' offices, and they're local MSPs for the most part, supporting, more of the smaller business, less regulated, right? So I'm talking HIPAA, PCI compliance type things, right? Things that don't require true certifications in the traditional sense of the lift for CMMC. And so they don't have the staff, they don't have the capability to. So what I warn people of all the time, make sure that your MSP has full alignment, and for your sake, contractually, make sure that it's written in there. I mean, I know people that have had to pay out multi-year MSP terms because it wasn't written into their contract and their MSP wasn't supporting them for CMMC anymore.
Wow.
Like, that's crazy. Don't be that company. Get your lawyers involved, get things straightened out, and then make sure that your MSP has full alignment and is willing to support you during that assessment.
So on that note, we see that a lot as well. To your point, MSPs, little local MSPs that have some clients, and they obviously see this, and maybe one of their clients is like, oh, they're in the DIB, so I need to figure this out, or I'm looking to proactively get into that. But it's not necessarily their area of expertise. What would you advise clients in terms of like questions to vet certain MSPs around their understanding of this?
Here are some of my favorite questions. What is your tech stack? What tools are you using to support me? Which ones of these are FedRAMP moderate or moderate equivalent? Which one of them are going to have access to my controlled and classified information? Are you using a backup tool to a non-compliant cloud? Well, we can't use that anymore, right? Kind of going through that list. Next up is the customer responsibility matrix. The art is formerly known as the shared responsibility matrix, which highlights the 110 controls and the 320 assessment objectives that you basically have to say, are you doing it or am I doing it? And then you honestly need policies and procedures backlinked into that document, how things are handling, artifacts and screenshots, and potentially even names of individuals that will be participating in the assessment to represent those controls. And so between the tech stack review with cloud services and the customer responsibility matrix, the other basic questions I'd ask, how many DIB clients do you have? Am I your first one? What happens if I fail the assessment because of you? Do you have measures of repercussions you can take as a client against them? Do you even want to open that can of worms? Right? Are you U.S. persons or potentially U.S. citizens, depending on the type of data you're working with? A lot of MSPs outsource work to India or Eastern Europe for the 24/7 element of their business. And again, if they have access to your systems and you have ITAR data on them, that's a violation, right? If they have the ability to see unencrypted technical data, that's a problem. And so when you start kind of going through these just initial questions, usually by question number 1 at the end of it, they're realizing like, oh, I use Datto, I use ConnectWise, I use Kaseya, I use all these tools that are hosted in a non-FedRAMP cloud. I don't self-host them. I can't really use any of my tech stack to support you. Or I have to really, really limit it to be able to support you, which I'm not going to do because I'm supporting 90 other clients and they're fine.
Yeah, don't care about it. Yeah.
I'm not going to have to change my whole system because 2 clients maybe that I have are going to need to do the CMMC thing. So again, having those open, honest conversations. If you're already in a relationship and a contract with a managed service provider, get on the phone with them today and walk through these things. And if not, you might have to escalate to contracts and legal to understand how do we break this? Because if they can't support us, it's a guarantee fail of our assessment. Like we're not going to be able to pass our assessment.
Yep. To further highlight. I'm sorry. I was just going to say to further highlight that point. Yes, from the C3PAO and everything Daniel's saying is correct, and that's how we view it, right? Like we have to assess that MSP, that external service provider, for the relevant controls that they're helping with. Now, if they're CMMC certified, that's a different discussion around what that looks like. But I would agree with you. I think all of those questions that you laid out are fantastic. You won't need all those questions. You'll be able to tell very early on from just initial conversations as to their actual area of expertise in this space. So, I would definitely implore you to, heed Daniel's advice, maybe take some of those questions that he had, ask your current MSP, because I do see a lot of that. That's a really good point, Daniel. A lot of clients, if I'm like, hey, are you working with anybody or do you need any outside assistance to help you get ready? Oh, we already have an MSP. Great. To your point, start having that conversation with them now. Don't just assume I have an MSP. I've been working with them for years. I haven't had any issues. So they should be able to help me with CMMC. Those two things do not necessarily equal each other. They
do not map up. Because here's the thing. A lot of MSP tools are starting to see the growing market share of CMMC. So they'll overlay like compliance frameworks and all these other third-party tools. Just because they have a button they can push to see what the controls are does not mean they're set up operationally to support that. Just because they have a plugin, and I've seen this time and time again, does not mean they actually have competency to deliver the service.
Okay, Daniel. Well, I think we need to wrap up. So much more that we could get into and that I want to get into. That just means we'll have to do a part 2 at some point.
We will.
But thank you again for joining. Any last parting words of wisdom? One of your favorite sayings you already threw out. You can be early, you can be late, but you can't be right on time. Any last words of wisdom for anybody that might be listening here today around anything regarding CMMC, what Summit 7 does, any of that sort of stuff?
So if you are deciding to ignore the CMMC problem, you need to be prepared to sell off part of your business, position yourself for acquisition, pick up a lot of commercial business and drop defense. You are in for a very vivid wake-up call. And I don't say this to scare people for the sake of scaring, because listen, I don't like to do that. I hate the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, thing. But the reality is, as this becomes a requirement, and as you are unable to meet the requirement, primes are going to start cutting you off, and you're not going to be able to win direct rewards as a prime if you are a prime. And so when you start looking at this, the reality is really starting to sink in. You need to do something now if you want to protect your defense business. Outside of that, Summit 7, great company. I've been here a long time. We're approaching 300 employees, 40 clients that are CMMC certified. If you need help on any of these things, Microsoft Gov licensing, implementation, managed services, compliance support, like if you need anything that we can help you with, feel free to reach out to me in my LinkedIn. I'd be happy to assist in any way that I can. We have a bunch of free content on our YouTube channel. We do a CUI hotline every week where you can just come and ask your questions for free. We'll answer them. Just please dive in, learn as much as you can. And honestly, as a business aside, do we want to keep defense dollars or are we okay losing it? And that's really what it's coming down to. Somebody higher up the chain needs to make that decision, and that reality needs to sink in a little bit deeper than it has the past few years.
Yep. Well, here's to conversations like this and 48 CFR to, I think, bring that tidal wave of truth. So I think it'll be a really interesting time over the ensuing months. Daniel Akridge, thank you so much for your time today, my friend.
Absolutely. Thank you, Matt.
All right. Thank you all for listening. Tune in next time to Mostly Compliant. See you guys.